This used to be an 8-story building. Now this is all that's left. Inside was a clothes factory, a bank and shops. Tens of thousands of people are now at the site in Savar, a suburb of Dhaka. Firefighters and the army are using any equipment they can to reach people trapped under the debris.
They will be working overtime hours just to get by, because they can't possibly get by on the wage that they're paid without working incredible amounts of overtime.
I met workers who were 14 years old. I met workers who were 13 years old. I met workers who were 12.
But what was news were the suicides.
What you just saw were some really scary examples of how bad working conditions in factories can lead to tragedy. Working conditions of these factories can be so harsh. Some examples of these conditions are working 15, 24, or maybe even 30-hour shifts, working in unsafe buildings that could collapse at any moment, working in a building where there are no fire exits, or working under incredible pressure to perform. All these companies care about is the product and how quickly it's being made. This is just inhumane and immoral to the people working there. So the first clip I showed was the 8-story building collapse at Rana Plaza in Bangladesh. This disaster killed 1,129 workers, but it also impacted all the big-name companies who produced overseas with a lot of international scrutiny. Suddenly, a lot of companies had to look more closely at the conditions of the factories their products were being produced in. They created organizations to help them with the factory monitoring, and they signed agreements to tighten up the security of inspection standards and upgrade safety measures. This is horrific, right? Well, it gets even worse. Reports have said that the factory owners urged workers to work in the factory despite the evidence of the building being unsafe. According to the government report, Sohel Rana, the owner of the building, illegally built floors on top of the factory to hold more workers and machines. On these floors, there were power generators, and these were necessary because of the regular power failures, but whenever these generators were switched on, it would shake the poorly constructed building. On April 23rd, the day before the collapse, a crack was reported and many workers left the building. And engineer said it was unsafe, but Mr. Rana and the factory bosses didn't care and sent the workers in the next morning. But it's not just the physical impact on the building collapses. These conditions take a mental toll on the workers as well. Now, let's get onto another subject, which is the company Foxconn. Now, what is it exactly? Well, what it is a huge multinational electronics manufacturer headquartered in Taipei, Taiwan. They have factories all over the world, including the USA, and they employ about 1 million people. Many of you have probably never even heard of this company, but they make everything from Samsung TVs to the iPhones in your pockets. Foxconn is a separate company from Apple, and in recent years there have been a lot of outrage about the conditions in these factories. So in these factories in the past couple of years, 14 people have committed suicide at Foxconn by jumping off the buildings. So here's a picture of one of the factories at Foxconn, and as you might see, there are nets around this building. Now, you're thinking to yourself, well, that's kind of unusual that there are nets around a factory building. Well, this was Foxconn's sad attempt to stop the suicides at this company. Now I'm going to switch over to child labor and living conditions at Foxconn. So Foxconn said they had 56 children ages between 14 and 16 have been found laboring in its plant in Yantai, Shandong province. Now, the living conditions at Foxconn are very cramped and unpleasant. These workers live at the factory, and according to a report, typically 20 to 30 people share a 3-bedroom apartment stocked with bunk beds. That's just ridiculous. Use of high-energy electrical appliances such as hair dryers, kettles, and laptops is prohibited. But employees who violate the rules risk having their appliances confiscated and not returned until they leave the company's employment. And the hours are very long. Pressure is very high to deliver. The workers sometimes have to work crazy amount of overtime hours, 15, 18 hours, sometimes even more. How it works is they work, they get off, and then they go to sleep. And then the next day, they repeat the same thing again. For some of them, the pressure became too much, and the only way they felt they could stop the cycle was to end their lives. And now onto money, the wages were not enough to live on. Another reason why they have to work so much overtime. The base pay of an employee is around 2,200 to 2,500 won a month, or $350 to $400 in US, up from the previous 2,000 won, which is $321 in US. At this rate, working regular hours does not cut it for families, and this is also why underage kids can end up working brutal 15-hour shifts. So now on to the topic, who is exactly responsible for these conditions and for fixing them? The factory, the brand, the government, the consumer? For sure, the factory has to be responsible for the safety and health of their workers. But the brands that pay the factories to produce their products also have a responsibility, don't they? What would happen if Apple decided they didn't have to help and they stopped working with Foxconn to go to another factory? Many Foxconn workers would lose their jobs and families would be poor, making the situation even worse. So what Apple has done is they have agreed that they are going to do whatever they can to help, including paying more to the factory. The government is also responsible to make sure that the factories follow the laws and the construction requirements for building codes. Some people even say that these situations are happening because of the demand for cheap products is so high, that the American consumer buys so much. So are we responsible? Well, one report says that we as a country must look closely at our habits and the message we are sending to corporate America. Yes, the Chinese government, the factory managers, and the multinational corporate executives are very much responsible for those suicide nets around the factories. However, we too are responsible for those nets. Our government regulations and our consumer behavior, our relative lack of skilled labor, are also responsible for the outsourcing of our jobs. So now on to my final topic, which is my stance to this whole situation. Now, I believe it's companies and governments have to work together to make sure the conditions and the workers are safe. The brands must support by working with factories that provide for their workers and rewarding those factories for doing a good job. One of those problems with these big name companies is they always want to find the cheapest price, and as a result of that, sometimes they have to work with factories that don't even care about their workers, but only care about making money. So now this all ties into my ethical analysis of solidarity. There isn't just one easy answer to fix all these problems. there isn't one responsible party. If conditions are going to improve, it will be because many people, companies, and governments will work together, and this will form solidarity within the community. Thank you.